There she is. Thank you. This is community dinner, September 24th, September 24. So we're in this nature in its order theme. Thanks if you're watching this video. Thanks for watching and being part of the greater community of understanding health from an angle of at its source and through frequency and actions and processes versus the snapshots, which are chemistry and what we call science, which that isn't really, we want to look at, they call health a practice, in the masters I study with. So you master something means you can live it. Like I look at the Bible now and it's easy to understand the metaphor in the Bible because they're pointing at natural law. They're pointing at nature's order and how it unfolds through all the ways we label it. They have Buddha and Krishna and Mohammed and Jesus, and they're all pointing at the same phenomena. The Greek gods, they're the lesser gods, the same thing as the lesser Hindu gods. They're just different names, but they're pointing at the same phenomena. So tonight, the aim is we're starting a cleanse next week. And so cleansing generally involves some degree of stirring stuff up, transformation. So we're trying to offset dryness this time of year. And it's in that sense, cleansing can be a little difficult because it's hard to scrub out a stain without some water, for example. So there's these metaphors of dryness, and what are some of the more obvious ones? Dry skin, right? What's the extreme of dry skin? Wrinkles and flakes, right? Wrinkles and flakes. And that's exactly what happens when, for example, now the vitamin D thing pops in. So the action of vitamin D says, get the sacred nutrients back into the blood, get the calcium into the blood, get the proteins into the blood from the gut. That's what they talk about, but they don't talk about the other side is when we're in the sun too long, we get tired. And I used to practice this in college. I would always go down the beach in Cal Poly Avila Beach. And it would have been 10 or 15 minutes. I could get 12 hours of sleep. I'd be bone tired. And that's vitamin D toxicity because your body's getting that radiation and is turning cholesterol into the hormone called vitamin D. And there are 27 forms of it. And they give you D3 and they call it, it's actually a toxic hormone. And so it says, get all those nutrients and put them back into the blood. So what happens to your nerves and your muscles and your skin then? All the nutrients going back into the blood, leaving those areas. So you get cramps and tetany and tiredness. And that's what sunstroke is. You die of all the nutrients have left your organs and gone back into the blood. That's the action is this. And Royal Lee, and that's why I love standard process, because this guy, Royal Lee, was like this hidden genius that was constantly pounding the FDA and the USDA from 1929 until he died in the 60s. The guy, that's what standard process bloomed out of, this man who was studying with Weston Price and Bernard Jensen, and they all referred to him as the genius, and he's hidden. And why is he hidden? Because he was telling people in 1954, we are treating the reactions of starvation with poisons. He was coming out and saying it in gatherings with physicians and stuff, and to the deep state. He was the heretic, they'd take him out, and they took standard process out twice. But the people were so into it. This is the power of the people, kept bringing it back. That's the power of the people right there. Standard process is around because of the people said, fuck you, we're not putting up with this. We're bringing this guy back. In the end, Royal Lee said, I didn't make a dime. I put every penny of what I got, give it back to the American people through my company. He walked away with nothing. And that's why I admire him. He's a true hero because he gave back everything. Like the native chiefs, they gave back everything. That's the honor, accumulation to give back. That's what I don't want this here. Can you give it back to the community? So vitamin F is what he discovered. They were talking about this when they were looking at the E complex in the 10s and the 20s and the 30s. And that's where, that's when I got fascinated with nutrition, is when I found these standard process people, because they were looking back 100 years. And that's when all the original thought was. Since the 50s, there's been no original thought. It's all plagiarism of these geniuses from about 1890 to about 1950. We were about 70 to 80, 90 years behind because of the deep state. So I'm reading this vitamin F research, and it's like, so our ancestors, how did they not get sunburn? They would boil barley or some grain, and they would drink the boiled water. And that gave them a form of vitamin F, and they could go out in the sun all day. There's some evidence that flax seeds wasn't, some people use flax seeds. And so Maybe there's something in the seed coat and a little bit of oil in there, and that's what the vitamin F, because vitamin F is a fat soluble vitamin. So wait, finish. Generally, we'll just have a little period of questions, Kelly. So the action of F is put nutrients from the blood into the skin. And then what they call the price factor or the Wilson factor is sort of a combination of K and E and F, and it's sort of like the sergeant that says, put it here in the bones, put it here in the muscles. There's an intelligence to this, the raw enzymes. That's why raw cream helps your joints and pasteurized cream and milk hurts your joints. It's because the enzymes are destroyed in the pasteurization process. And that was part of the deep state's plan. They took Pasteur's words, mislabeled it, didn't listen to anybody else, and ran with the whole industry they're making billions of dollars on, right? And poisoning the people in the process.
Was that why people that live in those countries have high osteoporosis rate? Because they drink a lot of pasteurized dairy products?
That's right. And one of these geniuses was Francis Pottinger back in the 30s. He did a study on cats. And he discovered what Price did with humans. When they started feeding cats, they did a study with raw meat and dairy, cooked meat and dairy, and their zoo chow. And the cats on the zoo chow and the cooked meat and dairy couldn't reproduce by the end of the first, barely by the end of the first generation. By the end of the second generation, they couldn't reproduce. And they had a short lifespan, and their life was, their coat didn't look as good. And this goes back to Edward Howell's work of enzyme nutrition. Remember, even thinking requires enzymes. So that puts brain fog in a different light, right? If you eat too much cooked food and you're using your enzymes for all this stress, then you have less enzymes for thinking. Therefore, the cure is enzyme therapy and more raw foods, including raw meat and raw butter, because we talk about raw vegetables, but the real enzyme raw foods are your caloric raw enzyme foods. So raw butter is miles above pasteurized butter because of what's destroyed in the pasteurization process. All these living enzyme complexes that kind of look like this, And that's why the clear egg white turns white when you cook it. It's those proteins twisting into some aberrant shape that's no longer the body can recognize. That's why you always want to annihilate your food 100%. So you want it broken down to its constituent atoms as much as possible. Okay. If you can't do that, then that's what becomes viruses, in my opinion. These small protein chains. I did this apple cider vinegar. Kelly, you'd love this. I do these tinctures, with apple cider vinegar, and then I strain them. And no matter how much I strain some of them, there's always this little dark sediment in the bottom of the jar. And so I did a time sequence of this one. I posted on Facebook. There was all these scattered particles, I thought. And then they would always clump back together in a little clumpy ball. And then I'd shake up the jar, and they'd seemingly fall apart, and then they'd always go right back together. And I'm going, there's an intelligence here I don't see. Even when they seem separate, they're actually still together. How do I know that? Because they just sit for a while, and they come right back together. And I've strained it and everything. Like there's some herb particulate that the SCOBY got attached to, and that's what's lost when we cook foods and cook meat. So the raw meat, the raw fish, I'm going back to that now. I've been eating cooked meat, and so Royal Lee, I'm losing the vitamin F, so I want to finish that. I'll go back to this part. So the vitamin F is in their product called Cataplex F. People say, what can I just eat what's in the product? And I go, well, Royal Lee was a freak formulator. So there's cow prostate. I don't want to eat a whole lot of that. There's flaxseed meal, which would be pretty easy to do. There is this special form of iodine, this corn protein one that they seem to love. That's in there. And so iodine's in there, head scratcher. Bovine liver patented yakatron extract from cow liver. That's been patented in Japan since '56, part of their whole allergy product called Antronex. I could spend a whole hour talking about that. Early, it was searching the world for what worked, like I do. Look who's getting results and why. That's my whole life. That's my whole practice, 30 years of who's getting results. Oh, that looks good. Let's try that. So Royal Lee was a studier of results. That's why he threw spinach out, for example. Spinach was a non-functional food. You couldn't get a functional result in blood building with spinach, but he could with beet greens. So in his product line, he featured beet greens and not spinach. Oh. Because spinach didn't have the bioavailability to change someone's lab work. And we don't do that work anymore. the guys before the original endocrinologist, Henry Harrower, from 1890 to about 1905, he would give people a pineal gland and pituitaries and thyroids and gonads and mammary glands, and then he would measure their blood work and see how they changed. And that was the original true endocrinologist. Do you ever hear about him and your endocrinologist today? They probably don't even honor him in medical school. But his work became the foundation of endocrinology. Henry Harrower, you ever heard of him? I didn't hear about him until I found the standard process people 13 years ago. I'm like, wow, we don't hear about all these heroes, you know? And so vitamin F then becomes an oral sunscreen, which as a surfer, I was dying for most of my surfing career, because I knew that sunscreens you put on, most of them cause cancer, and they don't tell you that. Like, my teacher, Michael Tierra, said, never put anything on your skin you wouldn't put in your mouth.
That is a good one.
Wow.
That's been my standard ever since I heard that 20 plus years ago. Like, nope, if I can't put it in my mouth, it ain't going on my skin.
How about shampoo?
I don't even use that now. I have these just like bronzers in my hair and shit. I've gotten down to that, and it dries things out more, but that's back to dryness. So soap could be on this table over here. Soap causes dryness. Why does soap cause dryness?
Takes the oils out of your skin.
How does it do that?
Because it's an oil cutter. I mean, it's a degreaser. So cuts through oil.
But how does it do that?
The polymers interact. Polymers overtake.
So, fat and water don't really bind together, and that's what our cell membranes do. Is there's a water soluble and a fat soluble layer, and it's the center of that's a phospholipid, and that's what lecithin is sort of based in. But the central molecule in lecithin is actually phosphorus. Anybody realize that? I didn't know. I started studying alchemy. It's like, wow, phosphorus. And phosphorus is called the light bearer element. Your fireflies, that's phosphorus. It causes them to glow. The phosphorescence in the ocean, that's phosphorus. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the energy molecule, that's phosphorus. So in your bloodstream, then, that's why they always see on your basic lab work, you'll see your calcium and your phosphorus. They're paired together. And these people before the 50s, they would measure thyroid function by the calcium to phosphorus ratio in the blood. The more calcium to less phosphorus, the slower the thyroid, and the more phosphorus to the less calcium, that would be called a hyperthyroid. Because calcium is very stable, like concrete, and phosphorus is very hot and bright. So you need, like, nitrogen would control phosphorus, because nitrogen is the basis of proteins. Nitrogen is called the controller element in Bernard Jensen's system, called The Chemistry of Man, great book. So I want to kind of keep getting urged to finish this vitamin F thing. So you take this oral sunscreen. There's a nutraceutical that came out, Skin Solutions. Cindy over at Skin Solutions, we talked about it, and she showed me. It was synthetic, and so when you get synthetic B vitamins or synthetic vitamin anything, they're made from chemistry, from some lame starter material. I'm not going to go into that story because you've all heard it too many times. But there's no enzymes to drive. That's what Roy Lee used to talk about. Roy Lee said, you can't take apart a watch and put back the parts you want, because then it won't work. And that's what they've done with life. They pull out these enzyme, vitamin, mineral complexes. There's actually protein, enzyme, mineral, bioflavonoid, phytotherapy complex that we don't even understand. But they pulled on these strings of life because these deep state people have this hard on for the God molecule and controlling of it, because they're so traumatized, they have to control everything to feel safe, apparently. I mean, that's what a traumatized person does. They got to control everything. So you can imagine how traumatized they are. I mean, Satan's probably been beating them up too many lifetimes. So the reason I talk about vitamin F is because it brings moisture to the skin. It brings hydration. Generally, in iridology, you can know that because there'll be a darker ring before the white of the eye. Like my eyes are blue in the center, and then it's really a darker blue around the outside. And it looks lovely, it's like, oh, what a lovely eyes you have. But Bernard Jensen used to call that skin anemia. It's called the scurf rim in iridology. Generally, you see it more in a blue-eyed person than the darker-eyed people. But if you get into, like in Dean's eyes, I'd have to get a special Photoshop something and manipulate into a negative or something. Then they can start to see what's going on in the darker eyes. And then there's the light brown eyes, and you can see that too. And so the center near the pupil is sort of like the center of the body, the stomach and the digestive system. And then as you work your way out, There's different concentric rings that mean different parts of the body. And the different pie slices are the organs. So you can actually, in iridology, you can actually say the circulation to the muscle in your kidney is impaired if you have good enough equipment. I don't care. I don't need to know that detail because it doesn't line up with the way they see it in science. It lines up in a different way of seeing health. So they have Bernard Jensen all pinned down on Quack Watch. They have this whole study they did, and they compared all of his diagnoses as to what they actually were medically. And see, he's a quack. He didn't agree with our diagnosis. But who's to say they're right in the first place, right? So F then, are you going to eat bovine liver fat extract, flax seeds, prostate of cow, ionized calcium, So generally not. So the recommendation is you take 3 or 4 before you go in the sun, and then 3 or 4 every hour you're in the sun. And I've been doing this for 10, 11 years. And I don't get sunburned. But you have to keep the dose going. Some of my office people have tried it over the years and they get mad at me because they get sunburnt, but I told them, you weren't dosing every hour, were you? And they go, no, I forgot. Well, disclaimer. Another one I found was I was in an emergency. I didn't have my F and I was down in surfing with a buddy in LA a couple years ago. So there's one of those aloe, the orange flowered aloe, the barbadensis, and I just broke a leaf off and just rubbed it like a madman all over my face and then let it dry. And I had this theory that it might be my mask in the sun, and I didn't sunburn. I surfed about an hour and a half, and I was out for about a half hour, 45 minutes. I felt it washed off, so I came in and did it again. It was growing near the beach. It was at Leo Carrillo. If anybody knows Leo Carrillo State Beach, I love that place.
Oh yeah.
At the rock. Yeah, it was on the inside. It was on the inside, riding those little rights on the inside. So yeah, it was like this mask on my face, and it's like it got me thinking, like, you could maybe do comfrey juice on your face before going to the sun. Just smash the greens up, and it's this mucilaginous layer. It would look kind of funny, but and well, I shouldn't say this publicly, but there's a feature in the Mankind Project of the Green Man, and I was the Green Man in one of the initiation weekends, and it was really fun playing that role of male fairy running around the forest and freaking everybody out. I got to run around and be the little Weasley guy, and pop up suddenly and make them get all green and who was that guy, and then run away and freak somebody else out. You would have loved the role too, Kelly. It's just like being the forest nymph and being weird and getting having a good time doing it. And you're totally accepted for it. Unlike when we were kids. Why are you so sensitive?
That's what's fun to have like a helmet cam or something when you do that. Record it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh my god.
You're sneaking up on them.
So like one, just to finish the skin protocol. So if somebody has dry skin, one protocol would be dry skin brushing. You take the F. You take some lymphatic herbs that would help this peripheral circulation. And it's so simple. One of these common weeds here in California is figwort. It's growing outside. I have it outside and over there. It's also good fodder for the pollinators because it'll flower year round if you keep it wet. And so that's really important to me that I keep my pollinators happy because they're the ones that bring in sometimes the predator insects to kill the bad insects, like the wasp and whatnot. So that would be a protocol, would be F, dry skin brushing. And I have some core lymphatic exercises. You want to be moving this around. This is your core lymph for your upper body and the inguinal area down here on the pelvis. And so there's a series of exercises I developed. It's just basically swinging the hips, swinging the arms, and keeping these joints, the lymph in these joints moving. Because I dated a lymphedemiologist years ago, and she, quote, said, she was an MD level. She said, quote, the biggest cluster fuck of the body is the lymphatic system. And you know why? It's because that's the toilet for your cells. Your cells are bathed in the plasma, but the plasma and the lymph are separated by a sort of a layer, if you will. And so your cells have to eat and poop. And so do the bugs that live in your body. And that becomes the medium. And so when that starts to dry out, there are signs of that. Another one is, I suggest you all start looking at your tongue every day and take your pulse every day, because it's a dry pulse is narrow. A nice wet full pulse is wider. Like if you feel my pulse and then feel your own, you'll feel I got a nice big wide pulse. And it's like a guitar string, and that's the bow string we talk about in Chinese medicine. I'm not going to pick on. that's tension. That's vata in Ayurveda. It's twing, twing, twing. And some people, their pulse, you can't find it. It's so flabby in there. And that's a sign of something else, dampness, or you'll feel like there's a pearl running across the surface. And that's also mucus and dampness. So if you learn your pulse, then you can just go, well, the easy way to start is like, well, how big is it? How fast is it? How close to the surface is it? And you can just put 3 fingers up and see. It's a great way to check. That's how acupuncturists know when you haven't eaten breakfast, because your pulse is smaller. So, did you eat? No. And because the stream is drier, right? When you haven't eaten, the center of the stream is generally here. That's where we make blood. I wasn't going to pick on you. I wanted to from.
Comfortable couch.
Yeah, so when you think skin problems, you also should be thinking lung cilia and gut lining, because they're all epithelial or skin cells. There's 4 tissue types in the body, and that was one of the great realizations to the standard process people again, was all their doctors realized we have 4 tissue types: muscle, nerve, connective tissue, and muscle and skin. And so it's just variations of the same thing. So when the acupuncturist looks at your tongue, what that's telling him is that how is your gut lining? It's the same cells all the way down to the anus. So if it's cracked and what I call hamburger helper tongue, then it's cracked and hamburger helper all the way down. It means you got permeable leaky gut and a high potentiality for allergies and autoimmune problems. Autoimmune is no mystery. They make it sound, oh, it's autoimmune disease you get. It's like, no. I mean, if you live here in a nuclear power plant, you're probably gonna have autoimmune problems, but most of us don't live next door to a Diablo Canyon or whatnot. Thank God we don't. You have It's like, I talk about people like, like mutations. I talk about people, if you're gonna worry about radiation, then mutate for the positive. You don't get all worried about the radiation. If you gotta live near radiation, then just mutate for the positive. I'll get a 3rd eye right here, Yeah, I'm gonna tell you like that one. Positive mutations, So that's what speaking of mutations, so standard process developed these PMGs. That means proto-morphogen. You separate the word proto and morphogen, bless you, then you realize proto is protein, or the form. Morphogen is the morphogenic field, or the blueprint that makes the form, or the proto-morphogen. So as the story goes, I love sharing this story because this guy was a freak weirdo like me. He had a lab like I did, but he had a warehouse lab. So he had all these money and resources around him. And so we had these organ meats in these big barrels and pickling in salt, basically. And you notice that no matter what it was, whether it was a liver or a uterus or skin or the bones, there was this white sediment would settle on the bottom. That wasn't the salt necessarily. And so he isolated that white stuff on the bottom, and he wrote a whole book that's this fat called Protomorphology. And it's basically about how the body makes itself. How does the blueprint become form? Because we have a sort of a sacred blueprint that we grow into, if you will. Like I was putting this question to Jean or the housemates is, plants grow towards the light. What are humans growing towards? I think Abraham would call that we're growing towards our vortex of creation. We're growing towards our vortex. And so the further that gap is, Abraham says, the more we suffer. I think that's a great apt metaphor. There's a part of us that's way over here, but we're actually over here. And the more it's stretched, the more we got a rubber band out to it. And that means suffering. That's why Cindy, like last week, voluntary suffering, which is austerity, leads to less involuntary suffering. The masters all knew this. Go sit in silence. Go fast, cleanse. Helps these transitions where fluidity is part of the higher level of health. And that's what I've been studying, is how to stay fluid, because I ain't very fluid. And so I had to find a way to navigate the surface, sort of bipolar life, Hey, I'm teaching others. Here's the bipolar guy up here. The freak fairy guy up here, teaching people how to be people. Funny joke. Oh my goodness. So does anybody have any questions about F? Or Kelly had a question actually too. So Kelly, you have a question still?
So vitamin F so it's interesting because I remember learning about beta glucan, and was like, wait, that's in every one of,
Oats.
it's in oats and barley. Is vitamin F beta, is it the same thing?
Royal, that would be a Royal Lee question, who's dead. So, that died with him. Yeah, we could try. I mean, we could try and channel him. I channeled Alan Watts for Noel once.
Hey, that would be cool.
Did you use a Ouija board?
No, I don't need that. No. It involved a lot of cannabis. Oh man. Okay, so to finish the F, so F was part of the E complex, and you know how they started calling tocopherols vitamin E and ascorbic acid vitamin C. Well, the funny joke is I have the diagram of what vitamin E actually is as a complex. It's about 12 things. Like this thing called xanthine is a part of vitamin E, and selenium is. It turns out there's vitamin E1, E2, and E3. Royal Lee would find that there's a form of vitamin E in pea vine juice that's different than the form of vitamin E in wheat germ. That's different than the form of vitamin E in this other thing. So one of their products is called okra pepsin E3. That's a featured product in the cleanse starting next week. Because pea vine juice generates this form of vitamin E that heals scars and damaged tissue. So the idea with okra pepsin is you have those folds in your intestine that get coated with slime and mucoid plaque. The okra comes in. Oh, by the way, before the FDA stepped in the 50s, the product was called comfrey pepsin E3.
Oh, wow.
But they shut them down because, comfrey, we did their little 10 rat study and gave them 500 pounds of comfrey. And, it's just so out of context, ridiculous. So yeah, okra has similar properties, but okra is nowhere near comfrey. And the FDA knew that. They can knock this out because comfrey heals dead tissue. I've seen it happen. It regenerates tissue that you would never think regenerates. I'm a walking example of it. I should not even be alive according to so many medical people look at me and they go, this is what? How are you alive? Grace, mostly, but the miracle of plants. So think about it. Plants are in the sun all day and they're in the wind and they can't get out of the hot air. We get to go,
You can see it in a microscope. Sylvie used to cut herself when she was in the lab at UCSC, and then she put comfrey on to watch her skin cells repair themselves in the microscope.
See,
Wow.
there's the proof right there. It causes cell proliferation. And that's the allantoine, which is related to urea. Now, allantoine, you see all the beauty products, right? And so there's a physician that knew about this in 1934. He wrote a book about the connection of allantoine and comfrey. 1934. I have the PDF. I save all this stuff because it's like, they're going to destroy as much as they can. So they sacked Alexandria and they sacked all the sacred centers because they didn't want this generation of slave to know where we came from. But no, it don't work that way. Spirit is actually running the show, and these deluded dark beings are going to have the flashlight on them real soon.
Yeah, that's why they burned the Alexandria Library 3 times.
That's right.
There were so many.
All the sacred science.
There were so many books there.
And conveniently label a high priestess, Mary Magdalene, as a whore when they would fuck the war out of the men. Literally, that's how do you get a man out of PTSD? You treat him with kindness and respect and love and nurture him to get him out of that. Because he came from this place of hate and killing. And I mean, most men don't want to kill. Somebody put something on Facebook that was really relevant, says that, most people just want to be left alone.
Yeah, right.
We're watching Outlander, the Scots just wanted to be left alone. Just leave us alone, we're a farm and have our life, And you keep pushing the average person, especially a man, you push them. I just want to be left alone, leave me alone. And just pushing them, just leave me alone. There's a point where they snap. Because now they've got nothing to die for. There's nothing left to live for because it's all been taken. And then you've got a lot of pissed off people with nothing to live for that are coming at you with a sword.
I think that's where Australia is getting back now.
That's exactly right. Just leave us alone. Just, leave us alone. You do what you want to do. But, whenever you have an agenda, because I've had lots of agendas in my life, it never works out as you hoped, does it? Does it? Especially if it's a dark agenda. And remember, I hung out and grew up with the surfers here with a lot of dark agendas. Hundreds and hundreds of times I've tried to get myself out of them and somehow stay entangled because I wanted to remain in the pecking order of the surfing scene. Because if you weren't nice to those guys, you didn't get waves in Santa Cruz. And it's like, wow,
That's crap.
it's evil. But that's, Lars knows. But now it's different out there. I was talking to a guy that he grew up here too, and he knew the O'Neills, and we were talking about this morning at the lighthouse, and just reflecting on like, remember talking about the localism in the 70s. I saw a guy throw a board at another guy and hit him from behind. Just ridiculous men children,
Yeah.
ridiculous man child, behavior. And
They would push cars off the cliffs.
I've had my tires slashed, windows waxed at Pismo Beach, no less. Why would you want to be a localism in that way? Like, I'm sorry, Pismo Beach guys, you got a decent wave, but nothing to wax windows over, that's for sure. It's just a beach pound, So back to the subject at hand, nature in its order. So I wanted to get back to before the 50s, when people were studying how nature worked. Like when Yogananda came over in the 30s, he was teaching people spiritual science is what he called it. I call it subtle science versus the hard sciences, right? But the trouble with science these days is it's the new religion, and it's all bought and paid for in snapshots.
Yeah.
No one's studying process anymore. So Kelly, you'll like this. Your blood work is a snapshot of certain parameters in your blood at a moment of time. It's no better than a picture. So the process of the blood getting thicker or thinner or more iron rich or not, that's what we really should be looking at, is the processes occurring. And that's why I'm teaching, is because we're pathetically getting into these holes of like studying these little parts and not understand they all fit together.
That sounds kind of like a PC, like you have to see like the whole kind of things of what's going on and not just parts of it.
Right, but the problem is people are arrogant. And the natives when the white man came over, the natives go, I have nothing to teach you because you already know everything. And that's where we're at. We don't know jack. That's where we start. Every client that comes into my life is a question mark behind me. I don't know jack about this person. I'm making no assumptions. And then I'm clean. I'm free, actually, because I'm not coming in with my richness. The Jesus metaphor, the camel through the needle, then a rich man going to heaven kind of thing. It's the same thing. He's not talking about money. He's talking about rich in concept. You come in full, there's nothing to take in anymore. And that's the problem with people, especially with the current situation. Oh, one of my friends is a biologist who studied the PCR test for 20 years. And she's calling hoax and screaming at all of us. And she said she ran into this other person with a PhD and said, I understand science. And she just wanted to scream. It's just so arrogant. Science is supposed to have a question mark back there. Like cooperation, collaboration. What do you got? What do I got? Where's the truth in between?
The science is settled.
The science is settled. There you go.
Well,
It's never settled. Not ever.
It's the fluidity of the process. When they say it's settled, that's a snapshot in time of what it was determined at one point. But your point about the fluidity and the processing, you never have the whole picture unless you keep that into account as well.
Right. Well, I'm going to come back to the health angle because I'm going to finish this off but thank you. So when we dry out, we tend to go static and we get less fluid. So the lung and the large intestine start to get their influence. And I've been studying this for about 25 years. And I always seem to get a little bit of this special kind of mucus that comes out between now and the end of October. And some people call that a cold. And talking to a few people today about, you could debate that colds and flus are cleansing processes. Agenus used to talk about that. And that when we have too many of these foreign protein molecules that we haven't broken down properly, they become viruses. Agenus calls viruses like, they were like ghosts. He says they're like zombies. And I like this perspective. And Zach Bush has a little bit of the same thing, like intelligence, these strands in the apple cider vinegar, they find themselves, and because it's mainly frequency is really what's going on. And so what's drawing these things together is what I'm concerned with. And so when we head into fall, there's more of this sort of, because when the creek starts to dry up, the water doesn't move as fast, does it? And that's how we can get this time of year. I can get really reactive because I'm drying out, because everything around me is dry, right? Everything's really dry right now. And in China, they have tried to apply Chinese medical stuff to our area, but they have different weather this time of year than we do. So the autumn involves other elements to look at versus on the West Coast here, generally we have to look at, when you live near the coast, you got this weird paradox of dampness in the summer. But if you're inland in California, any more than 10, 15 miles, and you're getting more of that hot influence, right? And then you dry out because, as this says right here, see, heat is associated with dryness and cold is associated with wetness. Activity is associated with dryness, rest is associated with wetness. And this is wetness more as a metaphor than anything else. Like your dream is wetness from the water, dryness is the end. As everybody who strives for that moment of happiness that they spend years for and realize they missed the road there. Ahorita, right? Not ahora, ahorita, right now. There's only right now, and there's only right now, and there's only right now. And we keep getting, so Dan Millman, that was the whole basis of the Way of the Peaceful Warrior. Broke his hip, shattered it, spent 4 years preparing for that moment in the Olympics when he won the gold medal. And then what's the quote when he won the gold medal? It was the driest moment of his life. Because he realized he spent 4 years preparing for that moment and he lost 4 years of his life. I call it, I'll be happy then. I'll be happy when I pass that car. I'll be happy when I get that wave. I'll be happy when I get sex. I'll be happy when I go to sleep, right? I'll be happy then. There's this implied future, right? I'll be happy when I get enlightened, when I find my guru. I went through that for a little while. We call it spiritual seeker. Nagashanti says that's a disease. At its worst, spiritual seeking is a disease because you're seeking the water that you're swimming in. You know, and it's already here. And so you come back to a couple of basics. So take your pulse for a second, check it out. So it's like, take a person next to you and compare it. It's like, it's really, this is where you get the somatic experience of like, wow, I'm really different than this person. Like even just, because that's the lung meridian that the pulse is on right there. It's just inside of the bone. You'll feel a vein there. It varies by the person. You can put all 3 fingers near that bone and then try somebody else. You're like, wow, that feels a lot different than mine. And that's what I've been doing for 20 plus years. Wow, your pulse is a lot different than mine. Yeah, and some people it'll be hard to find. That's right. Some people will be very hard to find. I'm trying to.
I find it so much easier right here.
Right, but there's a certain quality to the ones in the wrist that I can teach. I don't know the qualities of this one.
You have a very strong one.
I'm going to pause the recording for a second. Pause it. So we're doing the pulse taking, and then another one is your tongue. And like my tongue feels dry. So generally when somebody sticks their tongue out, you can see if it's wet or not. So that's the first thing to notice. Is their tongue have a wet or oily coat, or is it dry looking? And if it's dry looking, then they haven't had any water in a while. That's fairly obvious. But you don't generally want to see a dry tongue, right? Because you want to see moisture in the digestive tract. Because when things dry out, what's associated with dryness in the intestines? Constipation. Constipation, yeah. It's the first question I ask my constipated clients is, like, how much water have you been drinking? That's the easiest way to cure it. Hey, look, there's a SCOBY on top of that. Look, there's a SCOBY on there. Freak show. Okay, sorry, recording people. Digression. Okay, so I wanted to finish this vitamin E thing. So vitamin E was known for protecting the DNA. So what's the DNA? Really, as a process in our existence.
Kind of a code.
Okay. And what's the code? What is the code of?
I guess it's a template which shows you how to grow.
It's the morphogenic field blueprint.
Right, yeah.
So here's one of the secrets I learned because of the standard process doctors. They don't teach you this. So the immune system has another function they don't talk about because it patrols the body for lysed DNA of exploded cells. Because you don't want the instructions on how to make thyroid cruising down to the gonads, right? You don't want your knee cell instructions going up to your ear here.
Right.
It's pretty weird to have a knee growing out of your ear, right?
Yeah, right.
So one of the immune system's jobs, if it sees lysed DNA, it grabs it and searches for the trail back to where it came from. So if you have autoimmune thyroid, as they call it, it means your thyroid cells are exploding due to stress of some sort. And the thyroid DNA is exploding out into the bloodstream. And so that's why they measure your thyroid antibodies, because the immune system, that's how they make antibodies, and they put it on the problem so they can track it later with the killer macrophages and swallow it up. It's quite amazing to see this on live blood cell analysis. These big, and wow, a lot of respect for the little beings living in us, and you start to see them, actually running around in there. Whew. And it's important to realize that this is pretty much within our control. If we drink enough water and we eat enough raw, and so we want raw oils because that's where you're getting the enzyme complexes like the vitamin E1, E2, E3, and the tocopherols and the tocotrienols that Paul Galen kind of went on and on with one of his products, the tocotrienols, and they're better than the tocopherols. And I said, Paul, they're all good because it's part of what wheat germ oil was considered analogous to vitamin E in the 30s before they could grow soybeans and isolate the soybean oil and get the tocopherols out of the soybean oil and call that vitamin E, which is a very cheap process for the manufacturer versus extracting wheat germ oil and putting it in a nitrogen pearl like it's in our process stuff so it lasts for years and doesn't go rancid. Because the longer the saturated fat is, the more the tendency for oxidation is. And so that's what your fish oils, that's why there's this big, there's a whole thing going on about cod liver oil and vitamin A toxicity on the Weston Price thing online right now. And rolling my eyes again, I'm like, the Reader's Digest study came out years ago called the vitamin hoax, and the synthetic version of the vitamin caused the very symptoms it was supposed to cure. And they stopped all these studies with the synthetic nutrients. So synthetic retinol is toxic, just like synthetic D3 is toxic, because it's the vitamin E is being used up and the vitamin C is being used up because they're getting oxidized. And then what ends up happening is when you take like tocopherols, people with heart disease would die a week after taking tocopherols. They would feel good for a few days and then they would die. And they never showed these studies. So what do you think happened to these people? They were being told they were going to cure their heart disease with these tocopherols, and they feel good for a few days, and then a few of them, drop dead after a week. Why do you think? I mentioned it earlier. What runs everything in the body? They're deficient of enzymes. It's deficient of all the other parts of the E complex. So the body has to go find those other parts of the E complex throughout the body and bring it in so it can make the process happen. And you're more deficient in the long run. So the more reserve these people had, didn't have any symptoms, but the more deficient people in B vitamins and these other factors that drive this, they died because they no longer had the fuel to maintain the life processes because they were being used in this process. Yeah.
So for someone who doesn't have access to a whole lot of raw food, or what, I mean, besides ferments, that's the obvious solution for enzymes, but like,
Right.
Let's say someone's not doing ferments and they're not doing a whole lot of raw foods. What other option would that person have for enzymes?
I mean, they could try and get you could get cultured butter where you can't get raw, because the Organic Valley, they pasteurize the cream and then they add a sort of a creme fraiche culture to it, and then they make the butter out of that.
But is that really enough? I mean, it sounds like we're needing a lot of variety of enzymes. It's not just one enzyme fits all, right?
So there's two types of enzymes to really simplify it. We'll talk about the pancreas. So the pancreas makes digestive enzymes and metabolic enzymes. And so there was a guy, William Kelly, a dentist, and another dentist that developed a great cancer protocol, which is so ironic. William Kelly developed this pancreatic metabolic enzyme complexes for cancer. And so what the enzyme people knew in the 50s that was lost, thrown away, was that when you eat too much cooked food, then your digestive enzymes get used up, and then the body takes the metabolic enzymes and uses those for digestion. And then you don't have metabolic enzymes between meals to do the cleanup operations for the rest of the body. So you see, then things back up, and that's why you get rashes and headaches and lymph problems, because the chi is being used over here. And so, like I said, we talked about this. To me, there's not an option. You got to get raw. You could take Vitalzyme or Wobenzyme or these systemic enzymes between meals to help your body prepare more, and then certainly take digestive enzymes. That would probably be the first investment for that person. But I mean, my God, I would say, you know, every ounce of my experience and research over 30 years tells me that person has got to change their life to get the raw food. Otherwise, all bets are off, as far as I've seen. Because they knew this. They knew the basis of autoimmune in the 50s was too much cooked and refined foods.
So do you think the bitters make enzymes?
Now,
You know, like
there's that debate, you could get something from nothing. So bitters could cause the liver to start working better. Sure. It could improve the process of, so one theory is that's why you want to taste the bitters. So like Standard Process has a product called Digest Forte, and it's a bitters pill. And what's interesting is that feverfew, a little bit of feverfew in it, which I would never think of putting up bitters. It's like, because of the camphor. Camphor has traditionally been used in various forms in bitters. And so the thing is, the bitter taste hits the tongue, and then it stimulates this gallbladder hormone, cholecystokinin, in the brain, and it goes down to the gallbladder and says, start getting ready for the food coming down. So that's the basis of the bitter salad in Europe, you know, before a meal, or Swedish bitters, or is to get that process started. And that's really good for the carbohydrate type. It's generally sympathetic nerve dominant. They don't have cravings in their extreme. They don't even think about food. So you give them some bitters, or the suggestion in metabolic typing is give them an 8-ounce vegetable juice, and just give them a radish salad. And because radishes move along food stagnation. So radishes will also be featured on the cleanse, FYI. You know, the okra pepsin, the radishes, and the SP cleanse are kind of the 3 products that are going to be part of it. And there'll be some custom for each and everybody that wants to do it.
There's some enzymes right here.
Yeah, so that kefir, for example, Colette had a bad batch of milk this year, and my kefir curds literally went from fluffy and hydrated to hard little nodules. And they never recovered. And so I'm using pasteurized milk right now to see if they can come back. I don't know what happened to her farm this year. I have a feeling that some of the farmers are getting seriously geoengineered, and I hope that her farm isn't, but the milk this year really was weird a few times. And so that's what, they're alive, for sure alive, you know, they're definitely alive in there and generating.
A lot of enzymes.
Right, so that would be a good cure, would be if you can't process the casein of the cheese, then those people could strain, they could separate that and drink the whey. And that's what Jordan Rubin and Josh Axe were thinking about back in the day before they, I'll just say it, sold out. I talked to Josh about this about 10, 15 years ago, and they wanted to do cleansing with kefir whey, like liquid whey. And so Chris Masterjohn, the Weston Price thing, found out that glutathione precursors are very high in raw milk. So if you isolate the whey, then you've separated out that whole cheesy casein allergic element to the clear, you know, curds and whey, you know. So the curds are the hard part. Let me show it to the.
Your audience over there.
That's life, man.
Yeah, that's very yeasty.
That's
huh?
life. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeast.
So this is Kelly's here, and so my longtime friend. So you see this is a classic. There's the whey right there, and there's the curd. And there's these little brainy things in here. We were talking about these kefirs, but you can see like you just took the lid off, and then it went up an inch, you know. And so it's like it's got a little hairy hat there. You know, you really got to be a freak like us to appreciate stuff like this. So you people watching the video, there's about 15 people who are laughing right now. The hairy kefir. So part of this culture is due to Kelly. When I was living with you guys, I got the origins of this culture.
Tibetan.
And then you got then we added this one came from Fort Bragg. I had it overnighted in Fort Bragg, and then I added your Tibetan one. And then about 10 years ago, I gave it a refresher of something. I forgot what it was. And then this was the only catastrophe was this. It made it through a lot since 15 years ago.
That's ancient DNA. Thousands of
See?
years old. Thousands of years old in your hand. I mean, how cool is that? And then we're
That's
ingesting that.
Still in process.
Still in process.
That's right. So Stephen Herod Buhner has a book about sacred ferments. And one of the things that the people of old used to do, the natives, was when they did a ferment like this, they prayed to the spirits in the air because that's going to end up in the ferment. So I had a teacher, this old Taoist master, with Michael Tierra and the retreats. This guy would come in from San Francisco, and then he was from China, and his teacher was a master, a true master, he says. And he never left his mountain retreat, and he would never let anyone cook for him who wasn't a high-level adept. Why do you think he would do that? He would never let anyone cook for him that wasn't a high-level adept.
He didn't want anyone to restructure his water molecules unless they would do it in beautiful, symmetrical, hexagonal, snowflake-like structures. He's so spoiled.
So he didn't want to lower his frequency.
Oh.
He's spoiled.
Think about the
at
McDonald's.
highest frequency.
Think about the McDonald's burger, you know, like my brother worked at Jack in the Box, and he told me the most horrendous stories of what happens in these places, you know, like I don't want that kind of energy going into my food.
Right.
It's in the extreme, right? Versus, you know, this guy who he knew that's why you could always say you could take the most toxic Toll House cookies and grandma's love went into them, you know, there's an element to that, but you can't deny, because she was breathing on it. That's what they're talking about. The spirits in the air were nice, you know, and my grandma was a nutritionist, my mother's mother. And so bless her soul, Marie. I am partially because of her. And the ladies were making buckwheat pancakes today. And that was what I experienced as a child, was buckwheat corn pancakes with Caro syrup as a kid. That was her version of healthy. Oh my goodness.
But so much love went into it. I think
Caro GMO corn syrup before we knew it was GMO. But remember the dark Caro? I loved the dark Caro. It's probably so toxic. We didn't realize. Oh my goodness. Have you put the hair back on our critter here? That's going to be a tough job, actually.
Yeah, it is.
we'll give it to Kelly.
Can I work up? Do you have a separator? Yeah.
Oh yeah, we use, Gene, will you show that to your right there? The little bowl there, yeah, the little strainer. Oh yeah, good fun. What time is it? Okay, we got some more time for fun here.
Yeah, 9:04.
8:45, I got a few more pokes. You guys are great. I think you guys are staying awake and keeping you guys engaged. Okay, so now look at your tongue. Look at your neighbor's tongue. So I've been drinking this dairy, so I got white.
Yeah, split.
Yeah. So yours is pretty red, and there's some cracks in the middle, and the middle's kind of red. Did you have any dark foods in your dinner? You have the pie?
Yeah.
You have a piece of the pie?
Yeah.
Yeah, that purple pigment makes your tongue look really red.
Okay.
So it's pretpretty unfair to.
I ate a lot of beets.
Yeah, then that's unfair. Yeah, I was like, wow, your tongue's really red. I was like, yeah, we gotta wait till tomorrow. Because you got the beet pigment and the berry pigment on your tongue, you know, so.
Yeah.
And so everybody will have different tongue. You know, so there's big tongues, small tongues, long tongues, skinny tongues.
They changed their name.
So if you look at your tongue first thing in the morning, it's a good indicator of how well you're doing. And if you want to take it to the extreme, you can have a glass of water by your bed like this. And before you get out of bed, get a loogie or a spit and spit in the water. And then if it has strings going down or sinks, then you've got some candida issues. It's called the candida spit test. And so you could try that during the cleanse. I know that I'll probably start doing it soon. And then it's like, I'll start now, and then I'm gonna do some antifungals on the cleanse and see and watch this. I know my fungal levels from symptoms. I'm not gonna give you the TMI tonight, but I have a few symptoms that really tell me like, okay, the fungus is a little out of control. There's a medical term for it actually, but I wouldn't say it. Yeah. I don't want to say it, so I think so. Puritis, right? Puritis. Oh man, yeah. If it gets bad enough, it's like, okay, I'm going on my fungal protocol now, you know, because we all have sort of a foundation level what we were born with, and I was born with soy formula and never breastfed. So the foundation of my gut was like, it's always going back to this like larvae fungal. So I'm fighting that tendency my whole life, and it's a lot better now. I don't have to go back to the Antronexes and the gut products and standard process anymore. And my tongue, don't get sick anymore. But the tendency is there nevertheless due to the, you know, it also itches because there's a pH change. There's lots of reasons why that can happen. So the colon actually likes to be slightly acidic, 6.5 pH. So the small, in the intestinal tract, the mouth, the saliva enzymes are a little bit alkaline. The stomach is very acidic. The small intestine is very alkaline, like pH 10 or 11. And then the colon, it shifts back to acidic. So what do you think is happening from the small intestine to the colon to go from a 10 or 11 pH to a 6.5? What do you think is happening on that journey through the pipes in there?
Fermentation.
And what's fermentation doing?
Breaking stuff down.
Producing what?
Acids.
There you go. Lactic acid, right?
Oh, lactic acid.
So that makes them, so as it works its way through, the main resident of the small intestine of the lactobacillus species, they say, I don't necessarily believe that, I think that's what they call it, but again, the process in there is pretty unfamiliar to all of us, because as soon as you stick a probe in there, you now have observer effect in physics going on. So I don't think we really know, and we never will. So the lactobacillus produces lactic acid. They eat sugar and poop out lactic acid. Standard process has a product called lactic acid yeast. They found a special Saccharomyces species that poops out lactic acid. And a yeast that does that. So I give these products to people that crave sugar because it crowds out the alcohol producing yeast, or the poison producing, the mycotoxin producing yeast. That's one of the interesting ones. Some of these yeasts don't necessarily poop what you think they do. And again, we've been dumbed down to think otherwise, right? But Royal Leaf found this shit out back in the 50s. So it gets more and more acidic because there's more and more bugs pooping, eating food and pooping out acid, right? Everything eats and everything shits. I love grossing people out with this because we're mostly bugs. So therefore, we're mostly bug shit. Hey, Kelly, you're the captain of the bug ship. Captain Kelly of the bug ship over there.
You are what you drink.
Okay, Kelly, so I'm going to tell you something that you missed. We had this discussion, and for those of you that haven't seen this, there's a video, there's about 4 or 5 videos earlier where some of the old European physicians and myself were 100th monkey thinking about this. Monica's husband, Carl Merritt's been thinking about this too. It's called biopleomorphism. And you probably, so the contention in one of these books is that we don't crave what we think we do. The bugs are craving what they want, and they make us think that we're craving it, but it's actually them.
Biopleomorphism. I learned a new word.
It means shape-shifting microbes. Beauchamp talked about it, and Pasteur didn't. But Beauchamp talked about the terrain. And so we don't want a weed-infested garden in there because everything's eating, everything's shitting. So it turns out that the first studies I saw of this were in the 90s, the Trinity probiotic, and Natasha Trinov, they had this book about it. And so they would measure all the parameters and the nutrients in milk. And then they would make yogurt, and the protein always went up, and the B vitamins always went up, and that's the bug shit. So the yogurt, therefore, took something and made more out of it.
And this is so.
You got it right there.
Right here.
You got it right there.
B vitamins.
That's right.
Healthy probiotics.
Back to life, right?
20 different
Back to life.
species that are perfect for human gut health, just coincidentally.
So that's our gift is. I love it. That's been going on for like a week. I mean, that's like there's no sugar left in
This
that
has
milk.
been going on for thousands of years.
I mean, that particular batch is like it's well digested. So anyone who's lactose intolerant, which is another myth I tell people, you're not lactose intolerant because if you're drinking raw milk, the lactase enzyme is present in raw milk, so you can therefore be lactose intolerant. What's happening is you're drinking this curdled pasteurized milk. The proteins and the calcium complexes have precipitated because calcium's attached to protein. They pasteurize it and the calcium precipitates off. And it's unavailable at that point. That's why you see a high incidence of arthritis and reproductive problems. It goes back down to these enzyme protein complexes because enzymes are made out of protein. So that's why I tell people you focus on protein and fat in your diet. You eat that first. And then if you have room later, you have your carbs because carbs are not essential to life. Protein and fat are. So you can't make neurotransmitters without protein. You can't make immune cells without protein. We're going through it in the, well, nobody here's in the course. So, oh, Dina, you are. So, we're going through what protein is in lab work. Well, there's albumin and globulin. albumin's like a big carrier ship that carries like the lipoproteins. It's like a HDL and LDL is made from albumin. And then globulin's like your immunoglobulin cells and some of your thyroid hormone transport molecules. And so your connective tissue is made out of protein. Calcium's a bunch of bullshit. It's mostly protein. Got to focus on. And it goes on and on and on, right? Your insulin and glucagon, some of your hormones are made out of protein. And we talk about low protein diet. And the signs of protein deficiency are the first thing I look for. When a woman stops bleeding and she's 20 years old, like I've had so many of, these vegans, it's like, you gotta get back on some meat or something because you're blood deficient. Like your pulses are like dry as a dry stream, you know? And that's what that's really, it's almost 9 now. So that's really what we're here to teach. We have a cleanse coming, and that's part of like squeezing the sponge because we do these excessive things in the summer. Come into the fall, we squeeze the sponge a little bit. We have voluntary suffering and austerity. And the 3 featured products for this cleanse is I have like the 2022 cars are coming in, and I got these 2021 models of all these old herbs and apple cider vinegars and just like rock bottom prices. So for the cleanse this year, it's like, just come on in and, you know, we'll get a couple custom blends for you to cleanse with because it's like, it's just, the plants just want to be used. Like they're screaming at me all the time, get me in a human, get me in a human. I want to become a human. So, you know, I'm just the messenger like, oh, please, I'm getting screamed at. So, hey, if you're out there and you're watching the video, we're starting next Friday. Technically, I'm going to start before and set the energy of the container and get a good intention. But if you're going to do it, anybody in the room, anybody watching the video, is please set an intention for why you're doing it. You know, like I tell people that smoke pot to get high. It's like, that's not good use of energy. Why don't you offer to take in something good and get rid of something when you take the hit, you know? Set an intention for it. You know? I'm going to get rid of this and I'm going to take this in and replace it. That's how we change things, is by adding stuff in, not by putting a void in our lives. That's the secret of cravings, is don't try and deny yourself. I was watching Kung Fu again, you know, and the master's talking about, he's like, but master, I have desires and cravings. And he goes, yes, son, you acknowledge them, but you do not get attached.
Right.
He says the worst thing to do, this is a Shaolin monk. He says the worst thing to do is deny your desires, because when you do, they become 1,000 times stronger. And it's like Adyashanti would say, you know, one of my teachers, he's like, if you get angry when you're meditating or in your daily life, let yourself barbecue the person, but in your mind. Not at them, don't bubble it out, but let it process internally. If you're angry, you know, let yourself, because he has some great, he has a kind of a morbid teacher. So he's like, I wanted to barbecue the neighborhood dog. I can see it there, and, you know, in the rotisserie, and you just let it play out. And man, if you just let your mind alone and don't shame it, I have the most amazing meditations. It's just the most ridiculous stuff comes up. It's like, I haven't thought about that in 40 years. Oh, that was a ridiculous thought when I was 16. Wow. That happens on mushrooms, right? You guys, these old, it's like, wow, where did that come from? You know, that was cool. Like some hummingbird flying, the smell of the flowers, and then like triggers the memory. And like, wow. And that's what cleansing does, because there's memories buried in here. They're buried all throughout us. And like I was telling this story last week, like, you know, when I was in the natural law class, when I was driving in San Luis Obispo, and I knew it was a special kind of diarrhea because I was doing parasite cleansing, and, you know, just this stuff came out of me, and I knew it wasn't a normal poop because I was buzzing when I got back in the car. The parasites that had their straws in me were removed at that point. My body didn't know what to do with all the energy. And so that's important to realize. When we have more energy, then we're responsible to keep the containers sealed and not leak into the next addiction. Dan Millman's book, After the Way of the Peaceful Warrior, was called Gateways of Release. And it was about how scary movies and all these ways we don't get comfortable with our chi, we don't think we deserve it. And that's the Big Leap book by the Hendricks. We have an upper limit problem. Oh, then we have the subconscious saboteur that comes in. I don't deserve to be that happy, abundant, and joyful. So I'm going to sabotage myself now. I was talking to one of my male clients about that. It's called the upper limit problem in the Hendricks system. And that's why I study that book and stay grateful. Keep in your mantra, do your practice. You know, it's like, for me, it's like, my practice is always waiting for me. It is my sanctuary. It's 30 years, I go back to it. And it's like meeting God every time. I did today. It's like, been stretching it out and doing it later in the day and seeing the difference in who I am before and after. That guy at noon is a way different guy than this guy at 6. Wow. This guy over here, I want to be him. I don't want to be that guy at noon. I even had a cup of coffee before noon. It's like the guy, Craig on coffee at noon, Craig after yoga at 6. Who do you want to be around? I don't want to be around the guy on coffee sometimes. Like, oh, what have I done to myself? Because then you get the ADD mind, you know. I call it jabberjaw. So that dries you out. And so at this time of year, I tell people be very careful with the stimulants because they're diuretics by their nature. Caffeine's an insecticide poison. It's the diuresis process is your body trying to get it out. So understand that if you're going to do a stimulant, you're going to dry out. And it does slow down detoxification. The Ticino people had studies on this and they took them off for some reason on how caffeine slows down detoxification. Cuts off blood flow to the brain by 35%. It's in an NCBI study. That's how it alleviates headache because we're getting more blood flow back into the centers and then we'll just, it's great in medicine. You know, I've done it myself many times. So if you want to do the cleanse, I'm available next week. And oh, and by the way, everybody here from like 4 o'clock on, I'm just going to be around if you want to show up early for a few minutes and get a quick assessment for what you should have for the cleanse. Yeah, early. I'll be here early. And I'm publishing on the website what sort of the basic protocol is for supplements. And then it's the same idea with the food chart. There's this big food chart. If you want to go easy, you just follow the food chart. And if you want the weekly challenges, and that's one level harder, and you go into the daily challenges, and there's 3 levels of those. You can really, and I'm going to have some suggestions on the website this time. I'm only supposed to do this organized, and I may even do some Facebook Live stuff next week, get people excited about it. It feels like this is how we create the new world, is being clear. Brain fog is all a lot of it's enzyme deficiency because our body's fighting all the toxins and the lies DNA. And man, how confused your immune cells are if all your organs are blowing open. Oh shit, I got endometrial DNA, and I got uterine DNA, and gonad DNA, and toenail DNA, and hair's DNA. Your immune system's cruising around, and we don't even think about this. Anybody ever thought about this before? Your immune cells cruising around for DNA? It blew my whole paradigm of the immune system after that. I was like, wow, we've been duped, you know? So keep coming on, folks. You learn the things that the last 10, I'm just sharing like what I learned the last 10, 11 years, like, why didn't I start with standard process in the first place? You know, the bachelor's degree doesn't mean it laid the foundation of biochemistry and whatnot, but they do just as well with these technical programs, you know, with these companies, they're doing much better than the schools are. So we're building a new system, and you too can be part of my 240-hour program to learn what I've learned. So come check it out sometime, healthalchemy.com.